So over to you, Nicky.
Cool. Just checking this. Oh, it does seem to work. Can everyone hear that all right? Brilliant. Excellent. Well, first of all, good afternoon, and thank you all for coming along. It's nice to see a big group to talk to. Sometimes I talk to groups of just 5 to 10 people, and I've never had a balcony audience before, so that's quite cool. Hello up there. Yeah, as I said with Peter, I do a bit of background information at the start of the talk just to introduce myself a little bit. So this is me. You can probably tell with this accent, I'm not really from around here. I was born and brought up in Reading area, lived down in Reading until I was 18. Then I went to university up in Hull, which was quite a trek for me at the time. I studied economic and social history. Now, there is no link to air traffic control. Please don't look at it. It was just something I wanted to do at the time. I didn't know I was going to be a controller a few years further on. Girl guiding. Now, hopefully a lot of the ladies in the room will have been involved at some point, maybe as brownies, guides, rainbows, or at least have daughters or granddaughters who've been involved. I've been involved since I was 7 when I joined the brownies, and now I run a ranger group in South Manchester, which is for the 14 to 18-year-olds. And I'm also the division commissioner for the South Manchester area, so I look after about 30 different units that cover all the age groups, making sure that we've got enough volunteers to run the groups, that those volunteers have got the support and the training they need to run the groups properly. And the reason I'm telling you this is that the donations I get from doing these talks, they all go into the Girl Guide group. They don't go into my personal fund, so it's my way of fundraising for the group. And lastly, a little bit about me. I'm very much a rugby fan, and being a southerner, that's obviously rugby union. Big Sale Sharks fan for my sins. They did pretty well last year, if anyone followed them. We got through to the final at Twickenham, where we sadly lost, but hey, best season in a long time, and I'm hopeful for this year. But this is what I'm going to talk to you about today, my role as an ATCO, an ATCO, Air Traffic Control Officer, which sounds rather grand. Does anyone think this is the job of an ATCO? It's often the first thing that I get asked when I say, I'm on air traffic control. Oh, do you wave the ping pong bats around? No, on a nice day, and we do get nice days in Manchester occasionally, it would be quite nice to be out on the airfield in the fresh air, but remember this is Manchester and it's not always sunny, it's often rainy or in the middle of the night. So this job it's the airport marshallers. They park the aircraft. A lot of our aircraft now, their parking systems, it's a guided one, electronic system, so as they approach the gate, there's literally like a traffic light above them which goes from green to orange to red as they get near to the mark that they want to stop on. But occasionally if that fails or the stand doesn't have them, they get the marshallers out with the batons. So that's not what I do. This is a selection of pictures of air traffic across the UK. In the top left corner, I believe that's Stansted Tower. Bottom right down there is a picture of Farnborough. And the other 3 are from the NAT centres, the area centres, which we'll talk about as we go through. So what do we do? Very simply, I wear a headset pretty much like this, and I talk to the pilots. And in a room like this, if I'm talking at work on one frequency, if I'm, say, on the ground frequency at Manchester, and imagine you're all pilots and you're all in the front of your plane, we can all hear each other. If I speak to you, you can all hear me. If one of you speaks back to me, everyone else can hear. So we're all listening on the same frequency. And in really simple terms, if you take it complete back to basics, it's 6 instructions. Up, down, left, right, faster and slower. Simple. If you give all of those to the right aircraft at the right time, you will get to enjoy your holiday a lot quicker. So it's really quite simple. So the pilot obviously is in overall charge of his or her plane. They've got the ultimate responsibility for the safety of that aircraft. But if they choose not to do something that we as controllers have told them to do, they need to have a really good reason why. Because if you think about it, the pilot's job is to get their plane from A to B and their passengers there as quick as possible. That's what they're paid to do, that's their job. And they're only interested really in their plane, whereas we can see the bigger picture. Because if I said to you all now, run out through those doors, and you all got up at once and headed out, it would be chaos. Whereas if I'm ordering it and said, okay, this side first, then we'll do this side, it makes it much more orderly and everyone gets there a lot safer. So the company's mission statement is here, and it's to provide a safe, orderly, and expeditious service. And it's very, very much in that order. We have to get safety right first. Once we've got that, we make it nice and orderly. And if it's expeditious, we're all sipping cocktails on the beach a lot quicker. So this is, and hopefully it'll work, it's about a 3-minute video that was produced by the company I work for, showing you what happens in aviation in the UK and how the planes move. So hopefully it will work. Looks like it is. So there we go. That just gives you a little brief taster of sort of what goes on in the skies above us. So the company I work for, as I said before, is called NATS. It used to stand for National Air Traffic Services, and then back in the early 2000s, they decided that was a bit of a mouthful, and when British Telecom decided to become BT, they decided we'd become NATS. Now that's really useful if you know what NATS stands for, but still I have to keep explaining that it's National Air Traffic Services. So it's made it shorter to write, but I've still got to explain it still. We're part privatised back in 2001. Before that, we were owned by the government, controlled by them, so we were part of the Civil Aviation Authority. Since then, the government still own, I think, a 45% stake in NATS, and the other 55% is controlled by a group of the airlines. So the airlines who are our customers are actually part of our owners as well. We currently run air traffic at 13 UK airports. That includes Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, Stansted, Bristol, Farnborough, Southampton, Manchester, Glasgow, Belfast, Belfast City, and Aberdeen. And also at Gibraltar, quite randomly. So that would be quite a nice little posting, I guess, if you fancied a bit of sunshine. We also run 2 big area centres in the UK. They're the ones that sometimes pitch up in the news. There's one that's called Swanwick, which is on the south coast down at Southampton, and the other's the Prestwick Centre just south of Glasgow up in Scotland. And they control all the high-level stuff, so the stuff that's not necessarily directly in and out of the airports, but the stuff that's in the crews, or things like if a flight's gone from Germany to America, it will come across the UK, but I don't need to talk to it at Manchester. If it's up at 38,000 feet across the top of me, it doesn't really have an impact on what I'm doing. So the controllers at these area centres work those. And if you imagine a map of the UK and you draw an east-west line just north of Birmingham, anything north of that line is operated by controllers at the Prestwick Centre up at Glasgow, and everything south of that line is handled by the controllers down at Swanwick on the south coast. We've got about 5,000 staff in total across the company. 2.5 million flights handled annually in the UK, which is, when you try and break that down to like daily amounts, it's absolutely huge. A lot of the figures I'm going to give you in this talk, and there's not too many figures, so don't worry too much, but all of them come from 2019, because as you may remember, there was a little thing called COVID happened in 2020, and air traffic really took a massive hit. For example, Manchester Airport in summer 2019, in July, August, a Friday, which is always our busiest day, we moved 750 aircraft. On that same day, a year later, in 2020, less than 20. So it was a very, very quiet time for us at work. We spent a lot of time back at home because they didn't want a number of controllers that we'd normally have in the office, because that was a risk of transmitting the disease. So most of us were on home standby, and we only had 3 controllers instead of the usual 10 operating every day. In comparison, now we're back up to the high 600s, so we're not quite back at pre-COVID levels, but it's definitely getting there. I think in terms of business travel is never going to be the same again, because everyone's realised they can do most of it online and with Zoom calls. So whereas people were flying to Europe on the first flight in the morning and late back in the evening, that doesn't happen so much now. So it's much more the holiday flights that we're concentrating on. And again, 99.8% of flights had no NATS delay. Now, that's not saying that only 0.2% of flights in the UK had a delay. That's the ones that we attribute to us. So there could be many reasons that flights gets delayed, and I'm sure some of you have been on them over the years. There could be catering ones, or crew issues, or baggage issues. Could be other air traffic companies like, let's say the French. The French like to go on strike quite a lot. So I might be not able to clear a flight to take off from Manchester, but that's because it's a delay on the French side and not just because I'm being lazy and having a cup of tea at work. So the training, as I said, I joined NITES in 1998, having just graduated in economic and social history. I've never used that degree since. The odd pub quiz question, maybe. I applied. I was on a flight back from South Africa with my dad in 1998. I'd gone down to watch the British and Irish Lions. My dad was cabin crew with British Airways, which is where I've always had sort of a vague interest in aviation. So we'd been down there on the trip. I persuaded him that a daddy-daughter trip was definitely the way forward, and he wanted to take me with him on his flight. So we came back from Johannesburg, and the captain had said to me, "Would you like to come on the flight deck for departure out of Johannesburg?" I was like, "That would be amazing." And of course, before 9/11, you could do that. Nowadays, you can't get anywhere near a cockpit, but I could at the time. And the captain gave me this headset, and he said, "Oh, we're just talking to air traffic control about the best route out of Johannesburg," because there was a lot of thunderstorms around that day. And I just sat there, absolutely fascinated by the chat going on between the controller and the pilots, and listening to what was going on. So we took off out of Johannesburg, we dodged around the thunderstorms, and the captain said, he said, "Go back to your seat, but would you like to come back for landing into Heathrow?" "Yes, please." So by the time I got off that flight, I remember saying to my dad, "I know what I want to do." He said, "Oh, do you want to be a pilot?" And I went, "No, I want to be the controller." So that's how I got into air traffic. I applied, and I got through, and I joined in September 98, so I've just done 25 years now. The course at the time of the training college was down in Bournemouth, and we were there for about a year learning everything about air traffic. Now, they started from a complete blank canvas. They imagined you knew nothing about aircraft, which was great for me, because I knew what Concorde looked like, and I knew what a 747 looked like, and the rest, they were a bit smaller, a bit fatter, a bit wider. So they taught you how to identify the different types of aircraft, which ones flew further, flew faster, flew longer, different speeds. They taught you airport navigation, how the planes navigate. We learned a little bit about how planes fly, but really that's not my job. I just tell them where I want them to fly, and it's down to the captains and the first officers to do the flying. But we did a little bit of information on that. We learned about meteorology, the effect that the weather has on planes and aviation, but majority of our time was spent on a simulator on an imaginary airport called Seaton International, which was based somewhere on the south coast, and we learned how to control planes. So we'd have people in another room being the pilots, they would talk to us, and on the first day, you move one aircraft around on the ground, on the second day, you got it airborne, the third day, you might land it, and as that built up over the year, you moved more and more aircraft in all sorts of situations. Along the way through the college, there was exams. There was written exams, there was oral exams, there was practical exams on the simulator. It was quite high intensity, it was high pressure. If you failed the exams, pretty much you were out. They didn't really believe in giving you second chances. And about a year later, those of us that made it through the course were handed our basic air traffic licenses and sent out to our airports. 33 of us started on our course. I think only 20 of us came out the other end. And what's good for you as members of the travelling public is knowing that those of us that got through, we're actually okay at what we do. So that's really good for you. Our team at NATS Manchester, a fairly small team, 45 controllers, 5 assistants, 5 engineers, and 3 training and operations. So it's quite a small team. We're divided into 5 different watches, and we do work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So my shift pattern is a 10-day pattern of 6 days on and then 4 days off, and that just goes throughout the year. It doesn't matter if it's a weekday or a weekend or Christmas Day, New Year's Day. If my shift falls on those days, that's what I'm working. The 6 days that we work on normally start with 2 early shifts, and I'm back in tomorrow morning, so 6:30 tomorrow morning till 1:30. Then I do that again the next day. Then I switch to 2 afternoons, which is 1:30 to 9:30, and then it'll be 2 night shifts, so from 9:30 at night to 6:30 in the morning. Then I get 4 days off, and then I repeat it again, and it just works through like that. When we are plugged in, the maximum we can do at any one time is either an hour and a half or 2 hours in position before we must have a half an hour break. And that's a legal requirement because of the concentration levels. When you're moving aircraft, you've got to absolutely concentrate. You can't let your mind wander or just put your feet up and stop staring out the window for a few minutes. So an hour and a half, generally we might do an hour, depending on staffing. Then we've got a rest room downstairs, which has got, there's a TV if you want to watch it, some sofas, kitchen facility with dining area, because of course we're there through the day and the night, so we have to take our food in with us. There's no restaurant or canteens. They allow us a kettle and some microwaves. That's it. We used to have a toaster, but someone at Aberdeen set the fire alarms off by trying to make a toasted sandwich. Everyone had to evacuate. Toasters were removed from all units that next day, and we're like, where's our toaster gone? Thanks, Aberdeen. So yeah, we're there 365 days a year. This is we could still call it our new tower. Although it's 10 years old, it's just had its 10th birthday this year. Those of you who've lived in the area or travelled out of Manchester before will remember the old tower used to sit on the top of Terminal 3. And that was fine. It gave us a reasonable view of the airport, but every time the terminal evacuated because a passenger had left a bag unattended or whatever reason, we had to go out as well. And obviously the airlines and the airport got a bit annoyed that all the controllers were stood out in the car park waiting around doing nothing. So they built us this lovely new tower. The lift shaft, this big concrete shaft here, was made in a continuous pour. And if you go onto YouTube and put the Manchester Airport Tower in, there's a little time lapse which is about 30 seconds long. For the 3 weeks it took to build it, it basically grew. And they did a time lapse from the old tower of a picture every hour, so you can actually watch this tower just grow up, which is quite cool, because you go in for work one day and then the next day it would be up a bit more and a bit more. The big cab at the top, that was built on the ground, and then they got a giant crane, and they lifted it up, and they plonked it on, and it's not come off in 10 years, so whatever glue they used is pretty good. It does wobble very slightly in a high wind. You can just feel a little bit of movement in it, but otherwise it's quite cool. So we've got a brilliant view from up there. It's 17 stories. There's one lift. Occasionally it goes out of service. That's 17 stories of stairs. About 4 minutes to walk up, and for me personally, at least another 10 to 15 to get my breath back at the top before I can talk to pilots again. So if we know the lift's going out of service, we tend to take our stuff up there and we stay out there for the duration. In the little bit below, there's a small rest facility, a little kitchen area with tea and coffee. There's toilets up there because it's obviously a long way to pop back down if you need that. Also, the apron control, which is the airport staff who do the allocation of the parking stands. They are based in there, and the fire service have a watch room up there as well, so it's always manned up there. In the wing building down at the bottom here, we've got our radar facility, our restrooms, the boss's offices, conference facility, various bits like that. So it's quite a small thing. Nowadays, if the terminals evacuate, we don't have to because we're particularly separate. And they have said to us that if there's a fire in here in the bottom building, we're safe up there for 45 minutes. Now, if I'm sitting up there and there's flames coming down from there, I am not waiting 45 minutes to find out if that's true or not. I will be out down those stairs quite quickly. But that's what they say. So this is an overhead shot of Manchester Airport. It's a little bit old now. I need to find someone who'll find me a new one. You can see the tower there with its little rocket. Terminal 2's now got a big wing, a big new extension that came out to here, and they're building another one at the minute. This was finished in 2020, just before COVID hit, the big new extension. And Manchester Airport wanted to open that with big fanfare, and then COVID hit. We've got 3 terminals at Manchester. We didn't obviously need them through the COVID time because there was, as I said, less than 20 aircraft moving a day. So rather than keep 3 terminals up and running, the airport said, we want to just use 1. Makes sense. They obviously wanted to use Terminal 2 because that's their big, shiny new terminal. You might have heard of a company called Ryanair. Ryanair said, absolutely not, because they park currently here, very close to the runway, short taxi times, short turnaround. They did not want their aircraft taking the time to go up there and the extra fuel and all the associated costs. So they basically said to Manchester Airport, if you do that, we're pulling out. So Terminal 1 was used through COVID, and then just back, about 18 months ago, they actually opened Terminal 2 for use again now. Ryanair still parked down here, very close to the runway. You can see with these the staggers of the 2 runways that we've got, the original one and the new one that was built. I think it's just had its 20th birthday, runway 2. Now, I wasn't up in Manchester when it was built, but I certainly remember hearing on the news all about Swampy and the environmental issues and stuff. So if you've lived around here, I'm sure you're aware of it. When it was first opened, we were only allowed to use it for 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening, so basically our peak times, and the rest of the time we weren't allowed to use it, and that was to protect the residents of Knutsford, which is a small town which is at the end of the runway. They're just about off here. Now, there's only 750 metres between those 2, so I don't suspect there's an actual great deal of difference in the noise, but that was what the agreement was at the time. In 2017, we got permission to use the second runway from 6 in the morning through to 8 at night without closing it, which was really good because it gives us much greater flexibility and the ability to move more traffic. At the minute, we do 5 or 6 hours a day on runway 2, but majority of it's back on single runway. We're hoping when we get some more staff in next year for next summer, we'll be able to open runway 2 all the time again. Pilots love runway 2. It's very, very flat. It's just under 3 miles long. Runway 1, a little bit shorter, not much, but it's also got a massive hump in it. It's actually like this. If you lined up a 747 at either end of the runway, they will not see each other due to the big hump in the middle. The pilots know it as the Manchester hump, and if they're landing and they haven't got down before they reach the hump, then basically the ground's then going away, so they will fly around and do what we call a missed approach and do it again. Sometimes if they have a particularly hard landing, they might comment that they were trying to flatten it down for us, which is very kind. Whereas runway 2, being built much more recently, absolutely flat as a pancake. So in terms of performance for aircraft, they prefer that one. So our visual control room, that's the goldfish bowl at the top. That's a little view out, looking out to the north, so you can see Terminal 2 with its bit of extension here. Manchester City Centre is just on the skyline there. Looking down to the south, you've got the Jodrell Bank Telescope. That's about 6 miles away from us. Sometimes when they have the concerts at night and the laser shows, you can see that going on, which is quite good on a night shift. And this is a picture of the inside of the tower. So it's quite small when you get up there. We've got 4 operational positions, and then a watch manager at the back, an assistant who takes a lot of phone calls. So there's 6 of us can be plugged in working at any one time. And for a plane to get out of Manchester, it will talk to 4 different controllers just to get into the air. So this picture was taken in 2018, I think. It was for International Women's Day. And the airport said, we want to do something about women in aviation and to promote it. So they said to us, Thomas Cook, which the airline now sadly gone, but back then was still flying, they had a flight that had a female captain, female co-pilot, or female cabin crew, and they said, we want this flight to be handled by all female controllers, and we'll do a bit of a news thing on it and lots of publicity. Now, I thought that's great, brilliant. When I said we have 45 controllers at Manchester, just 5 ladies. It's not many. There's never a queue for the toilets, really good. trying to get all 5 of us in, or 4 of us in, to make this photo was quite tricky because we're all on different shifts, so some people are off night shifts. So the picture's there, and they say the camera never lies. Well, it kind of does, because this lady here, although she's there and she sat there, she's not actually controlling, and she's not actually a controller. She was a trainee who was with us and was just around on that day, and we're like, sit there, smile at the camera. Brilliant. I was called in off a day off and said, would I come in? And because I only lived 10, 15 minutes away, I was quite happy to go and do that. So just out of shot behind me is the guy who was sitting doing the controlling till I unceremoniously removed him, plugged myself in, smiled, handed him back his planes, and off I went again. So I think I was in the building about 20 minutes for that day. So for a plane to get out of Manchester, they have to talk to 4 different controllers. The first controller, which Joe was doing that position, is called our delivery. Delivery doesn't actually move any of the planes. Delivery, the pilots talk to say, we're on stand 12, we're going to Dubai, we're in A380, this is the time we're going. And we make sure that that information that they've given us is exactly the same as the information that we've got on our strips. And so it tells us what we're doing. So we all know that we're doing the same thing. They'll also tell them on delivery if there's any delays that are happening, whether that's at Manchester or further along the route for that particular flight. So if they're going through an area where we know, say, the rest of Europe has thunderstorms, we say, you've got a 20-minute delay at the moment due to that. So it's just an information passing to make sure we've all got the right details. When the plane's ready to go, so they've got the doors closed up, all the passengers on, they'll say to delivery, we're ready. Delivery then passes them on to the ground controller. The ground controller's job is to get the aircraft from the stands to the runway, and for those aircraft that have landed, from the runway to their parking stands. And we do that by using a system of taxiways. The taxiways are all named after different letters, so we've got taxiways Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc. And along those are stopping points, say Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3. So we've all got the maps, pilots have got the maps, and if I say to someone, I want you to taxi Alpha, Delta, and Echo to stand 6-3, and then for someone else, I want you to taxi Papa, Kilo, and Juliet to Juliet 1, I know those 2 routes are never going to cross, and therefore those aircraft are safe. If you imagine with pushbacks, aircraft, if you imagine you're in the flight deck, you're sitting facing the terminal building, you're ready to push back. You can't see behind you, there's no rear view mirrors in planes, so you're relying on us to say to you, yes, you can push back now, or after this one that's gone past you, then you can push and start. Once planes get to the runway, they get handed over to the tower controller. We've got 2 runways, so runway 1 and runway 2 controllers. Generally, when we've got both runways operating, we land on one and we take off on the other, because that's the most efficient way of doing things. And if you remember in that picture I showed you before with the stagger, we always land on the runway that the pilots will get to first. So when we're landing from the east over Stockport, we land on the northern runway and we depart on the southern runway. If we're coming from the west, so we're landing in over Knutsford, it's the south runway they get to first, so they land on that and we depart on the northerly runway. This means when we're on our easterly operations, which is the one we're normally on, so coming in over Stockport and departing over Knutsford, and that's basically due to the prevailing wind. Planes have got to land and take off into the wind to get enough lift to get airborne. And the prevailing wind in this country comes from the west, so probably about 80% of the time we're operating on that east to west. For the aircraft, they've then got to cross the north runway, the landing runway, to get out for a departure. So we stream our aircraft inbound about 4 miles apart, and that gives enough time for one to land, aircraft to cross over, and then by the time they clear the runway, the next one can land. And 4 miles works pretty well for most aircraft. If they're particularly heavy or a particularly slow aircraft, we might ask the radar controller to give us a 5 or a 6 mile gap just to have a bit more room. When we're just on a single runway, so we're landing and departing on the same runway, we tend to use 6 mile gaps to give us a gap between 2 inbounds, enough to get a departure. So as the first aircraft lands, the one for departure will line up behind it. As soon as that first aircraft's vacated the runway, we can clear the next one for takeoff, it gets airborne, and the next one lands. And 6 miles generally works in most circumstances for those. So as the air controller, you're constantly looking at the number of outbounds you've got, how many gaps you want, where you want them. You're talking to the radar controller. And then once they've crossed your runway, they come over to the departure controller. And their job, basically, is just to launch them up into the air. Now, if all planes flew the same speed and were the same size, this would just be really simple, because you'd just fire them off one after another, and you'd know that they would never catch. But life's not like that, is it? we've got aircraft of different speeds. If you sent off a very slow aircraft and then your next one's very fast and you launch it up behind, you're going to have a problem fairly shortly. If you launch a bigger aircraft and then you launch a slower aircraft right behind it, we have a problem which we call wake turbulence. You may have heard of this. It's basically an invisible force. As a plane goes through the air as it flies, it creates a hole as it pushes the air. And the bigger the plane is, the bigger that hole is going to be. And the bigger the hole is, the longer it then takes for the air to stabilize back again. And if we put another plane through that air before it's restabilized, it's going to lose all its ability to fly and potentially could crash. So it's something you can't see, but we know it's there. So for us, the A380 is our biggest aircraft. That's the big double-decker that Emirates bring in a couple of times a day. Once that launches, nothing else goes for 3 minutes because it creates such a hole that we have to wait. So the departure controller's job is to look at the different routes the aircraft are on, look at the different speeds, and look at the different sizes, and create the best overall departure order to get people away as efficiently as possible. So how does it work? The skies above us, if you imagine a map of the UK, are divided into 3D blocks. They're all different shapes, they're all different sizes, and as the controllers pass through them, sorry, it's not the controllers, the planes are like a relay baton. So each bit of airspace is looked after by a controller or a team of controllers. And as the planes pass through, they're passed from one to another. So to get out of Manchester, as I said, you've already spoken to 4 different controllers. Once you're passing about 2,500 feet at Manchester, we hand you on to the controllers up at Prestwick Centre in Scotland. So it doesn't matter whether you're going north or south, you will speak to the controllers at Scottish. So they're taking aircraft that have launched from Manchester, from Liverpool, from Birmingham, from Leeds, from East Midlands, and they're catching them all, and they're putting up to the cruising levels, and they're heading them off in the directions they want to go. And at the same time, all the aircraft that are coming into these airports, they're dropping them down, they're pointing them at the airports, and they're passing them across to the approach controllers. So they've got quite a different job to the one that we're doing at Manchester. We also have controlled and uncontrolled airspace. In the little video that I showed before, you may have noticed it looks like we've got sort of motorways in the sky. And these are protected areas of controlled airspace where anything that flies within them has to be talking to a controller. Therefore, we know what's in it and we can control what's going on. Each airport has a bubble of protected airspace around it, and these are like connected by motorways. So anything that's scheduled aviations, passenger flights, all go through controlled airspace. Outside of this, it's uncontrolled airspace, or bandit country, as we like to call it, and you can fly whatever you like out there. You can fly your hot air balloon, your Red Arrow, your Concorde, your little light business jet, your glider, your microlight, and the only rule is you look out the window and you don't hit anyone else. That's it. You can get as close to anyone as you want. They might not like it, but that's the rules. Inside controlled airspace, we have 1,000-foot vertical separation as a minimum, so that's for aircraft going over the top of each other, or a 3-mile horizontal. That's our absolute minimums that we go to. So if inside controlled airspace we get someone that's 2.9 miles away from another one, or 999 feet, we've had what we call a loss of separation. Sometimes you hear it in the news as there was a near miss. And it's us not having achieved the separation for whatever reason. If it happens, the controller gets removed from duty. The pilots get removed from duty. Everything we say and do is recorded, so all our radars are recorded, everything that I'm talking to the planes, so it can all be played back and we can see why that loss of separation occurred. Was it a controller error? Was it a pilot error? Was it a procedure error? And depending on the outcome of that, the controller might get a slap on the wrist and some retraining. Same goes for the pilots. If it's a procedure, that procedure will be re-looked at and sorted. And when I say we have reporting, this goes to the Civil Aviation Authority. So it's not just we keep it in-house at Manchester and go, they didn't get this, carry on. It goes to the UK Civil Aviation Authority, and they have the responsibility of saying, yes, that controller can carry on, or no, we're going to remove their licence, and then we're going to investigate further, they get some retraining. So again, for you as the travelling public, it's good to know that if anything happens, that safety mechanism is there. And you think if you're driving down the road, 2.9 miles, there's a car coming the other way, you wouldn't consider yourself as having had a near miss with that car. But now you imagine you're travelling at 500 miles of closing speed and you realise how quickly that space can disappear. So each aircraft has an individual information strip, and I've got a couple of these if you want to pass them around. Have a look. This is a picture here of what the strip is. It's about 6 to 8 inches long and about 1 inch wide. This is a legal record of the flight. So when we start work in the delivery controller and the planes are going, I'm this aircraft, I'm on this stand, I'm going to here, that's the information that we get on the strip. So on this one, you can see the call sign in the middle. So this is Shuttle 2905. Shuttle is the name that British Airways use for their flights internally in the UK. So I know who I'm talking to. I know the type of aircraft. It says here it's a Boeing 737-400 series. This top line here is basically the routing the aircraft wants to go. So it's like saying, oh, I'm going from Manchester to London and I want to use the M6, the M1, the M42. It's basically the air traffic coding for that. It's also got, this flight shows that it's going from Manchester Airport down to London Gatwick. Now, if I said to you, what's the airport code for Manchester? Anyone know that one? MAN? Yep. In air traffic, for whatever reason, we decided 3-digit codes are okay, but we're going to have our own separate coding of 4 letters. So this is Manchester, Echo Golf Charlie Charlie. Every airport across the world has a 3-letter code and a 4-letter code. Don't ask me why, I don't know. So the way it's broken down, E for Europe, G for Great Britain, and then the last 2 are specific to the airport. So CC is the code that was given to Manchester when they discussed it and debated these. And it's going to Gatwick, which is here, E for Europe, G for Great Britain, and 2 Ks for Gatwick. When we were at the college, that's one of the things we learn. It's like all the airports that we'll use on mostly a daily basis, we get to know them. Some of them are quite easy to learn, like in America, everything starts with a K, and then it's 3 letters. So New York's JFK is KJFK. Nice and simple, I can remember that one. Blackpool, also really simple. E for Europe, G for Great Britain, November Hotel, Northern Holidays, sorted, tick. Southend, don't really fly there very often, but I remember someone saying to me, and said, oh, I never forget Southend, it's MC, and I'm like, MC? And they went, Mucky Corner. And I've never been there, it could be doing Southend a great disservice, but if I see MC on the strip, I go, is it all right? So yeah, so we learn all of these when we're at the airport. Now, every time we give an instruction to an aircraft, we write it down on the strip. So whether that's a T for taking off, and then the time it's taking off, L for landing, if we've given it a climb, or a descent, or a taxiway, or a clearance limit, it all gets written on this strip. And every different position, so the 4 positions we got in the tower, had a different coloured pen, so you could see who'd written what. Can you imagine the state of these strips, even after an aircraft just getting outside of Manchester? 4 people scribbling on it with 4 different handwriting, and I'm a left-hander, and my handwriting is atrocious. Also, it goes this way, whereas everyone else's slopes that way. But these were kept as legal records of flights, and they would be kept, I think, for 7 years afterwards. So at the end of every day, the paper bits were bundled up, the date would be on it, and they'd be put into storage. And that was so in case there was any incident with the aircraft, they go back and they find the strip, and then they try and work out exactly what happened. It's a lot easier now. Some airports in the UK still use this system. Most of us have gone to a system of electronic flight progress strips. Much, much easier to handle. Instead of having to write things like times for takeoff, I just click the box and it automatically goes in, so you've got no handwriting problems. You can still see the same information, so these are the call signs, the aircraft types down here. You've got the coding for Manchester, these are all arrivals. So it's much, much easier to handle, much, much easier to store the data. We can share it easier with the airlines who want exact data of what was going on. And if I open one of the strips, we get a box like that, and it'll say things like the number of persons on board, maybe diversion airfields, if they've sort of planned that if we can't get into Manchester, we want to go to Leeds or somewhere else. Occasionally pilot phone numbers. I've never had reason to phone any of them and go, hello, but sometimes you might need one. So that's the information we have. Like I say, majority of UK airports, certainly all the big ones, now have electronic flight progress strips. Some don't. Most of the small ones, I think Liverpool is still on paper strips. Generally because of the cost of inputting these systems and training the controllers up on it. Before we went live with it, which I think was 11 years ago, each of us had to do 40 hours in the simulator on the new strips. And you think, well, doing that on top of the work we're already doing is quite a big input. Occasionally, the flight strips go wrong. And what happens then? We revert to pen and paper and pick it up, and we go with paper strips again. Now, our radar, that's the other thing that we do, the other discipline. This is a picture of a very, very basic radar. It spins around, and it goes, okay, there's something there, something there, something there. It doesn't really tell us a lot, does it? It doesn't tell us what the aircraft's doing, where it's going, what level it is. We don't know if these are now head-on to each other, or if they're head-on but 5,000 or 6,000 feet apart, or even if they're going in opposite directions. So what was developed over the years was a system called SSR radar, which is secondary surveillance radar. And what means with that, every aircraft that gets airborne, we give it a 4-digit code to start with. They plug that into a transponder box within the aircraft. And once the aircraft gets airborne and radar picks it up, it interrogates it and goes, okay, who are you? The plane sends back its code, I'm 4573. And we get a picture that now looks a bit like this. So instead of just a dot, we've got a dot with a trail, so we can see where it's going. And the trail dots are every time the radar updates. Now at Manchester, ours goes around every 3 seconds. So every 3 seconds, all our little planes jump like little maggots across the screen. The further apart the dots are, the faster that aircraft's traveling, the faster it's moved in that time. So if you look at this picture, you can see the speed differential between this one and that one, where the dots are so close together you can't see. So immediately you can see the direction of travel and the speed of travel. We also know who we're talking to. On this one here, we've got Ryanair 1592. I know he's coming into Manchester. He's one of mine because he's got that little 2C code for Manchester. On the middle line, you've got the down arrow, so he's descending. If they're climbing, it's an up arrow. It's dead simple. And I can see the level that he's actually passing at the minute, which was 5,900 feet. And then this orange number we got about 5 or 6 years ago is the selected level in the cockpit that the pilots are going to stop. So he's passing 5,900 feet, but he's going to stop at 3,000 feet. And that's a really good double safety method, because if I've said to him, I want you to descend to 4,000 feet, and I see that 3 pop up, I can stop him before he goes through 4 and maybe has an incident with someone at 3. So it's a really, really good safety mechanism that we've got. The last line, the bottom line, is 2 numbers. Now, the blue one, that's the indicated airspeed. So that's basically like if you're watching your car speedo, that tells you the speed you're traveling. And then the white number with the G in front of it is the ground speed. So that's the speed the aircraft's actually traveling over the ground. And that depends whether it's going into a headwind or a tailwind. So this aircraft is doing 220 knots indicated, but actually traveling over the ground at 274. So it's basically got a 50-mile-an-hour tailwind, which is great for me, because if I've got another aircraft coming the other way at the same speed, he's going to be going about 50 mile an hour slower because he's into the headwind. So it helps us with planning which aircraft's going to get to Manchester first. So this is the picture that I look at when I'm sat at Manchester Radar. Manchester Airport, in the middle, you can see a bit of coastline here to give you some perspectives. You've got the Wirral Peninsula. This is Harden Airport here, so I think you guys, Chester, were about right here, somewhere like that, pretty close. You've got Liverpool Airport here with its centre line. So Harden's got a north-east, south-west runway, pretty similar to us. Liverpool's much more an east-west one. The airport looks pretty small on radar, really. It's just a dot. The planes drop into it. They pop out again at the other side if they're departing. At Manchester, we've got 3 holding stacks. One up here, which this one is about to go into. One across here, just on top of Wigan, which is called Mersey. And this one down here is called Dane. That's over the Macclesfield Forest area. So any aircraft coming into us commercially will route to the nearest holding stack with the Scottish controllers, and they'll put them there 1,000 feet apart, and then it's for us to bring them in. So in this picture, we were landing over Knutsford, which is here, departing over Stockport. So this was our final approach. This is about 10 miles. These 2 parallel lines you can see here, it's a buffer zone between Liverpool and Manchester Airport. It's known as the low-level corridor, centred on Warrington, goes north and south. I think it's 5 miles wide and up to 1,300 feet. It's basically a hamster tunnel that private pilots can fly up and down without having to talk to either Liverpool or Manchester. So it's basically a cut-through to get from north to south. So we make sure our traffic stays over the top of it and Liverpool stay out of the way as well. All these different lines looks quite complicated when you first look at it. So the rings are just simply 10-mile range rings, so you've got an idea of the distance that you're looking at. These dotted lines here, that shows me the area that I can move my planes into. I have to stay within those dotted lines, and in each box, I know what level I can come down to. So that means for like this area here, where you've got Liverpool traffic maybe departing and ours coming in, I know if I stay in this box, I can drop to 5,000 feet, and Liverpool can climb up to 4,000 feet. Therefore, we've got that 1,000-foot separation, and it means I don't have to phone Liverpool all the time and say, what are you doing with that one? Can I do this? So it means we can operate without having to talk to each other. And my job, basically, on radar is to get the planes from the holding stacks, so the 3 stacks, to about a 10-mile final at about 2,500 to 3,000 feet, and about 4 miles apart if we're on dual runways, or 6 miles apart if we're doing the single runway. So we give the planes headings. So this aircraft will fly about a heading of 230 degrees till it gets to about here. Then it'll come down sort of 180 until it goes in. And in each box, I'm dropping it further down. We also slow them down because they come in quite fast, and we need to slow them down one behind the other. So the idea is by the time they get to a 10-mile final, it's all nice and orderly, one after the other. This is the radar room at Manchester. It's quite a long, thin room. They wouldn't give us any windows when they built it. They said that was a distraction and it was noisy, but they did give us a real big picture of a plane on the airfield. It's not moved in 10 years. It's not very exciting. Down the room, we've got 4 controlling positions. They're all absolutely identical. The first 2 we use all the time, and the second 2 are spares. So it means if any part of our equipment fails, I can unplug my headset from one, I can roll my chair down, and within seconds, I'm plugged in on the new system. So if my electronic strips went on one, I can move down to the other if there was a problem with one of the screens. So when I'm actually sat there, and I'm doing radar tomorrow morning, I'll be in, this is what I'm looking at. It looks a bit sort of, there's a huge amount to take in, but really you're concentrating very much on your radar picture in the middle and the electronic flight progress strips down the bottom. The rest of it is just a lot of information which can help you, but it's not really what you're focusing on. So down here, that's it's basically a telephone panel that connects us immediately to either the positions upstairs or to Liverpool, to Birmingham, to Leeds, to anyone else I might need to contact. We've got direct lines to the airport police and to the airport fire service. So if there's any problems with an aircraft that we need to report to those, we've got the numbers. We're not having to look up for the number. We can just press the button and it immediately connects us. Up here to the top left, that shows how many planes are coming in over the next hour. So the more, each horizontal line is a plane, the more there are, the busier you know you're going to be. The colour scheme, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you basically got green, purple and white on this bit, and that's for the 3 different holding stacks. The green one is the hold to the south, which is our busiest one, so I can see most of my traffic's going to come in through there. And the line up there, the different colours, is the different weight categories for the aircraft. So that's when I was talking about the holes and the airspace in the sky. So it tells us what's coming in and what sizes there are, so we can do a bit of forward planning. Up to the top here is basically just our manual of air traffic, which I've got a copy of it there. It's a book about 3 inches thick, just the basic rules of air traffic. We've got paper copies behind. I prefer using a paper copy. I can flick to that quicker, but some people prefer an online copy and they can find things in that. So if you want some information or you've forgotten something, you can get it at your fingertips. This top screen here is all our equipment. It's all showing there nice and green, so it means everything's working. If something fails, it flashes red, there's an audible alarm, we can see what it is and the effect it might have. It might just be a clock that's gone wrong, in which case that's not a particular problem. But if it was the radar, well, hopefully you'd notice that your screen was blank, as you wouldn't need to wait for an alarm to tell you that. And we've got procedures that cut into place as soon as something like that happens. And then the last screen down here is our MET screen, the meteorology screens. That tells us what the weather's doing, because if you remember the previous picture, they didn't give us a window. So I don't know if it's raining, if it's foggy, if it's sunny, what's going on. So rather than phoning up to the tower all the time and going, what's happening, that tells me the weather, so that if the pilots are coming in, I can make sure they've got the most up-to-date information at Manchester. Now, why do you get delayed? We've had a few delays recently with air traffic. You may have heard about it in the news. If you had a flight out of Gatwick recently, that's not going so well down there. Gatwick, we took the contract back from another company earlier this year, at Gatwick Airport asked us to take the contract back. They'd taken it off us 4 years ago, and they brought in a German company called DFS, which is not the sofa company, but the Deutsche Flughafenservices, to run it. And by all accounts, they didn't do the job that Gatwick Airport wanted, so they asked NATS to take it back over. The problem was there wasn't enough staff. We're recruiting, we're training people up, but it takes a good 8-9 months to get a controller trained up. You can't just drag someone in and say, off you go. So that's why there's delays out of Gatwick at the minute, because they just don't have the staffing. Weather, obviously, will delay. If you've got thunderstorms and things, pilots don't want to fly through the thunderstorm because, A, it's not nice for you as a passenger when you're bumping around. And also from a point of view, if there was a lightning strike and that hit the aircraft in the middle of a thunderstorm, it could take out some of the systems which are critical to that flight. So the aircraft don't like that. Imagine it's foggy. We're just getting to that time of year, those sort of autumnal mornings, bit of low-lying fog. Just like when you're driving your cars, you go much slower, don't you, when it's in fog because you can't see what's happening. And it's exactly the same for aircraft on the ground. Once they're in the air, that's fine. I mean, generally over 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, you're blue skies anyway. But on the ground, in fog, where I was saying before, on a single runway, we would have gaps between two inbound aircraft of 6 miles to get a departure away. In fog, it can be up to 16, 18 miles just between two aircraft, because the first one that lands takes a lot longer to find the runway exit and to come off than one lining up, takes a lot longer to go on. And obviously we want the aircraft to get their landing clearances that much sooner in the fog because they can't see what's going on. So from going one aircraft departing every 6 miles, we're now like one every 18. So that's like 2 aircraft missing gaps, and the delays build up quite quickly. Technical problems. Now, I don't know about you, I don't want to be on a plane that's got a technical problem, because if you're in a car and it breaks down, you pull over to the side of the road. Now, at 33,000 feet or whatever, that's not quite so simple, is it? And we do get quite a lot of technical problems. Generally on startup, the planes will push back, they'll go through the engine checklist, starting the engines, and quite often we'll get the pilot saying, we've got a small technical problem. They never refer to it as a big technical problem. It's always a small technical problem. Can we just sit on the taxiway for a few minutes? And we're like, that's fine, keep us updated. And they do generally what you would do when your home computer doesn't turn on the first time. You turn it all off, you wait 30 seconds, you turn it back on, and 99% of the time, that solves the problem, and off they go. Sometimes it's a bit more serious than that, in which case they say to us, look, we need to go back to stand, we need to get an engineer out, and we help them to arrange that. So whilst it's frustrating as a passenger, I'd rather be sitting in the terminal having another drink than on a plane that's not quite working right. Slot times. Now, slot times came into their own, was it 2-3 weeks back, maybe a month now, when the whole of the National Air Traffic computer failed. I was on that day, and it was a very, very strange shift, because our delivery position, which is the one that talks to all the aircraft, was absolutely going hammer and tongs, and we were using our best skills of diplomacy and anger management to keep all the pilots as happy as we can, and basically telling them, you're not going anywhere for at least 8 hours. The other positions, the tower, that wasn't doing very much, because the only planes that were moving were those that had taken off long haul before the system crashed, and they were still coming in. Nothing was moving outbound. So 3 of us were sat there doing not a lot, and we kept taking it in turns to take the hot seat. And basically what happened that day was, so for every plane that flies, they file this flight plan which says which airport they're going from, which airport they're going to, at what time, and what route. And this all goes into the flight planning system. Now, there was a particular flight plan that was from, I think it was America to somewhere in northern France. And it hadn't been filled out correctly, and the computer, rather than looking at it and spitting out, going, I don't like that one, I'm not happy, it basically just imploded, which it shouldn't have done. So it lost all the information of every flight operating in the UK that day. So we were then resorting back to pen and paper. So we were saying to the pilots, you need to get your passengers on board, which they didn't want to do if they were then going to have them on board for 8 hours. I can get that. But until they were on board ready to go, we couldn't then phone the centre and say, right, we've got this plane from here to here. Can you find the flight plan? And they were doing this manually and then inputting it back into the system and then calling us and saying, right, that one can go. And this was taking about an hour for each one to do. So that was why the delays were happening that day. We've been reassured that fault has now been fixed and it should never happen again, so fingers crossed. and we're coming to the end now. Why I love my job? I genuinely love it. Maybe not 5:30 in the morning when that alarm goes off tomorrow. I might not be quite so happy, but I genuinely do enjoy it. 25 years now. I'm an instructor at Manchester. I'm an examiner, so for the new ones coming through, I spend a lot of my time training, examining, as well as moving the planes myself. No 2 days are the same, really. You get different weather one day, you might get an emergency one day. You never know what to expect, and you've got to react to it. You can't get a plane saying, oh, hang on, we've got a problem, we're on fire, and you're going, oh, my shift's just finishing. Can I call you back tomorrow with an answer? You've got to come up with a plan absolutely at that minute to help the pilots, and we do an enormous amount of training for it. We go into our simulators every year to do emergency training. We bring pilots in to talk to us so that we know what they're looking for in an emergency and how we can help them. If they have an emergency, they've got checklists to go through. They basically don't want a controller in their ear going, have you thought about this? What about that? Do you want to go to Liverpool? Leeds is just across the road, anywhere there? They don't need that. So our job base is to say, I've heard you've got a problem. When you're ready, you tell us what you want to do, and we will make that happen for you. In the meantime, we make sure runways have got inspected and everyone else is prepared. You can't take your work home with you. Now, I don't know about you, I don't have a runway in my back garden. So once I'm finished the day, my headset's off and my free time is mine. So I'm just coming to the end of my 4 days off. And like today, I've been able to come down and talk to you guys, and I can do what I like. 4 days off is like having a long bank holiday all the time. Both my sisters live abroad, so I can go and see them without actually having to use any of my leave, and I can spend a few days with them and come back. So that really, really works for me. And I get paid to look out of a window when I'm in the tower, at least. And it's a lovely view from up there. On a clear day, you can see the Peak District and Kinderscout. You can see across to like the Frodsham Hills and then the Welsh Hills. Sometimes even the Liverpool cathedrals, if the light's right, they stand out on the skyline. So it's a stunning view from up there. And I do still love watching planes fly. Now, I'm not an enthusiast or a spotter. Some of them work with us, and they'll be like, oh, this plane, it's a brand new one, and it's just been delivered, or it used to work for this airline. And I'm like, that's quite pretty, that's quite cool. Each to their own. But there is something quite magical still about watching them go. And this one in particular, this A380, how the hell does something that size get off the ground? That's my question. It's some sort of magic. So that's more than enough from me, I'm sure you'll agree. And I believe there's a microphone come around, so if you've got a question you want to ask, if you stick your hand up, and then we've got to wait for the microphone for the audio recording.
Test. I have the roving mic. Yep. Ooh. Please wait for it to get to you, because so the people at home can hear you. Otherwise, Excellent. They don't know what the question is. That's it. Right. Kendra.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the very interesting talk.
You're welcome.
So I want to ask a question about trains.
Trains, okay.
Yeah, it's in relation to planes. Trains, no boats, but planes.
Yeah.
So government's shortly going to announce that H2 from London to Manchester isn't going to happen. Yeah. Now, if it did, would that not reduce the amount of carbon emissions, because more people would take the trains down to London and back rather than flying? I just wondered if it wasn't an argument.
I don't know, to be honest. I don't know a lot about that. I know we have a few flights down to London, between London and Manchester, but there's not many, to be honest, because it takes, when you think you can get Manchester to London in just over 2 hours, and then if you think, so on the train, and if you were going to fly, all right, the actual flight takes 30 minutes, but you've got to be at the airport several hours ahead. So for me, I would never think of flying from Manchester to London myself. I'd always take the train. And I think it's a relatively good service, certainly from Manchester. I don't know more what it's like from Liverpool to get down there, but yeah, I don't know how it would have an effect. Yeah.
How do you integrate with the military aircraft?
Exactly the same way that we deal with the civil stuff. So if the military traffic is coming through our airspace, and it will talk to us just like a civil plane would. But the military, they tend to have their own areas where they can operate, especially like the fast jet training. So over the North Sea and mid Wales, there's areas that we keep our planes very well away from, which means they can go and play and do their training and stuff there. But if one wanted to come and land at Manchester, they'll file the flight plan exactly the same way as any commercial jet would, and it would just be part of our system. Yeah.
Thanks. A minor question and a major. A minor, you've spoken in miles. Do you actually operate in miles?
We do, yes. Yep.
Yeah. The second one is we're right next to Harden,
Okay.
and I used to work in an office block here, and the beluga used to almost fly through our windows. How is that operated, and can you tell us anything about how the beluga behaves?
It's a very ugly-looking aircraft, isn't it? Let's say that for starters. Ooh.
Controversy.
It's unique. So we don't get involved with Manchester at the Beluga coming in. So the traffic inbound to Harden will work Liverpool Airport and approach. So it will work the Scottish controllers as it would, and as it flies towards Harden, it then gets past the controllers at Liverpool, and they then talk to Harden and bring it in. So we see it, and I see it quite a lot out of the windows. So on a clear day, it's obviously a very, very distinctive shape. You can see it coming in. So I've never had the ability to work one, unfortunately. I quite like to talk to a beluga, but they come into Manchester very, very rarely, unfortunately. But yeah, so the controllers at Liverpool and then Harden would work those ones.
How many of them are there?
I think there's five or six belugas. 5 small ones and I think 5 large ones. There you go. I do love the smiley face they put on them. I think that's very cute. Yeah.
Hi, excellent talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thank
and I'm
you.
flying out of Manchester tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock to
Are you?
Marrakesh. So be careful, please.
Give us a wave in
Look
the
after
tower.
that plane.
I'll look after you.
No, the question is actually, do all pilots have to speak English when they're dealing with air traffic controls, not just
Yes.
in Europe, but worldwide?
Worldwide, it's all done in English, and it's all done on GMT time. So it doesn't matter where you are. So if you're in France, a French aircraft talking to French controllers should be speaking in English. And that's so if we're all speaking the same language, it's from a safety point of view. So there was an incident in Paris, and I use the French. I've got a French brother-in-law, so I feel I can have a go at the French occasionally. There was an incident in Paris about 20 years ago where the French controller cleared the French plane for takeoff on the runway in French. And then the next instruction was to a British plane to cross the runway in English. So they started crossing the runway because they hadn't understood the French for clear for takeoff because they didn't need to. And as they crossed, they looked out the window and saw the French plane coming down at them. I suspect the words in the cockpit were something like, "Ooh, this isn't very good." They managed to get the power on. They crossed the runway. The aircraft took off over them, and they didn't collide. But if that had all been done in English, he would have queried the crossing clearance, having heard the fact that, hang on, you've just cleared one for takeoff, and now you're saying I can cross it. So it's for very much a safety reason that everyone talks in the same language. So in China, in everywhere, literally worldwide. So there's the trainees, when they first come to us, they struggle with the accents sometimes because a lot of the pilots have got quite sort of thick accents. I'm quite used to it now. You know generally what you're listening for and what you're hearing. Pilots have obviously got to maintain a certain level of English. I think about 10 years ago, some of the Turkish pilots weren't really maintaining that, and basically European aviation said, unless you sort this out, you will not be allowed to fly in Europe. So they then hired a lot of British pilots to help increase their language level. So it's lucky for me, because I don't speak any other languages, so it's great. But yeah, it must be quite difficult for some of the pilots, especially in an emergency situation where you're having to think in a different language to not your native one and explain what's going on. But yeah, luckily for me, English everywhere. Which drones? Yes, they do. Drones are probably accepted as the biggest cause of, if there's likely to be a problem, it's going to be caused by a drone. Until like 5-6 years ago, they weren't really a thing, were they? And then suddenly they're everywhere, they're very easily available. Same with laser pointers. Every night we get reports from pilots that they're having laser pointers shone up at them. So, you know, something like this, it hits a cockpit window and it refracts, and at night it then affects the pilot's night vision, which can obviously make it unsafe for them to land. Luckily, obviously, there's 2 pilots on every plane, and if it's coming from the side at one, the chances are the other one has been protected. But we file a report every night with the police saying which aircraft are being attacked by lasers. There's a big file of them in Greater Manchester Police. I don't really know what they do with them, because all they can say is it was over Oldham or it was over Wythenshawe or whatever. And unless they actually have troops on the ground and happen to see it, it's very, very difficult to go. Drones the same now. We do, as a company, Nats do a lot of information on drones and drone piloting and where you can safely fly your drone. There's lots of YouTube videos. There's supposed to be around each airport, there's restricted areas that the GPS on the drone should actually get close to it and then say, oh, actually, I can't fly any further, but people seem to find ways to get around this technology. So our procedure, if a pilot reports a drone, we file a report on it, we tell all the other pilots in the area to keep a good lookout. Until about 5 years ago, if we got that report, we had to suspend operations, and that would mean for maybe 20 minutes, we'd do nothing. Until we either got report that that drone was safely on the ground or until 20 minutes had passed. And that was happening several times a day. And eventually the airline said, we're not willing to stop and wait and have all these delays. So all we do now is give the pilots the information and they decide if they're happy to go or not. But we get drone reports maybe once a week at Manchester.
I think we have time for one last question.
Thanks so much. That was great.
Cool.
I was diverted recently because of a thunderstorm, couldn't land.
Yeah.
So would that have been the pilot saying, I don't really feel safe to land, or would it have been an air traffic controller saying, you shouldn't land, we're going to divert you?
It would be down to the pilot in that case. So if it would either be the fact that if we've got thunderstorms, everything gets delayed a little bit. So maybe they arrived and they found they were number 10 and they didn't have the fuel to hold for that long. So they could have decided on a fuel issue. Or if the thunderstorm was directly over the airfield, they might have just said, actually, it's not going to move. We're not happy to land there. We want to go elsewhere. So it's down to them. And then we make it happen. So we'll talk to the centres and go, OK, this one wants to divert to Liverpool or to East Midlands or wherever you ended up. Athens. Okay, not from Manchester. Phew. I was going to say, that's hard. Yeah, so that'll be the pilot's decision for the safety of the aircraft to decide, yeah.
Nicky, that was great. We're going to wind down because we're running out of time,
Sure.
but I think there would be more questions, and you've fascinated everybody, including me. I was going to ask about drones, so I was annoyed to have my question taken away from me. But thank you very, very much. We'll all fly more knowledgeably, whether more securely, I don't know.
Hopefully.
But you've given us a tremendous insight and you presented it nicely, and I'm delighted that you've spent a life goal guiding. I spent a lot of my life scouting. So.
There you go. You understand.
Well done. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers.